My name is Steve Grierson, and welcome to the video tutorial on how to build out a forecasting model. This forecasting tool was designed to assist program and project managers in building out a forecasting model. The tool is designed to calculate resource costs per week and then roll up into a monthly financial model that will demonstrate the financial health of your project from a revenue and cost perspective. The model will provide information on expected monthly and quarterly revenue and contribution margin based on a budgeted dollar amount allocated to your project. The tool also uses a network days. It's a Microsoft Excel functionality that takes into account the 5-day work week and also takes into account holidays to determine the hours per month the resources is forecasted to work. It can be argued that the forecasted model is the same as a bottom-up estimate, but for clarification, the bottom-up estimate is a project management technique in which people who are going to do the work participate in the estimating process. When the estimate of work, duration, and cost are set at that level, you can then aggregate them upwards into estimate of higher level deliverables and the project as a whole. The forecasting model takes into account that you've gone through your estimating, and at this point in time, your project manager is ensuring that the number of hours allocated does not exceed the level of effort relative to what the project is demanding. The tool that I'll be demonstrating today was built out in Microsoft Excel 2013. I will be working from a pre-built forecasting model, and I will demonstrate how the model was built. Before I get too far ahead of myself and to avoid confusion, what I want to do is just to present the layout of this forecasting model built out in Excel. We have some core data points that you would normally fill out when you're doing a forecasting model, i.e. your resource name, the roles, whether it's internal or external, meaning internal resources or partner resources. We have some rates, of course, partner rates as well as internal rates, your start and end date, your percentage allocation, and the summation, which is the total hours. What we also have is the forecast broken out by weeks. As you can see, 7/6, 7/13, 7/20. And what I've done is created an outline based on our quarter, i.e. Q1, Q2, and Q3. As we scroll to the very right, what you'll have here is pre-calculated fields. And again, this is based on network days, and I'll dive into that. And we'll talk about how the hours allocated remaining differs between their total hours and your pre-calculated number of hours and what this delta means. To the bottom of this spreadsheet, we'll talk about expenses, and we'll talk about the dollars based on the number of hours associated to each resource as a calculation value of their rates. So we'll dive into all of that, but I just wanted to give a quick overview of what this tool looks like from start to end. There are other components beyond the weekly PM only work tab, but what I'll do is I'll save that for another session where we'll talk about how this information then gets transposed from the weekly PM only spreadsheet into a monthly worksheet that talks through cost versus quarterly revenue expectation and contribution margin. As you could see, we are in Microsoft Excel 2013. I'm going to demonstrate how I've set up this model and how I populate the information to generate the forecasting model. I will go through each of the columns and the descriptor I give for each one of the columns, and then I will go through some of the formulas that shows how I built and I'm able to pre-populate a lot of the information to cut down on the number of entries that you as a program or project manager would have to make in building out your forecasting model. For this financial model, what I've done is set up some header information, again, my descriptors for each one of these columns. All projects typically would have a project number associated with that project. So in this case, I just put down a nomenclature of WBS number. And then here you would put the project number. You would also go ahead and where the label mark funding amount, you put the funding amount that's been budgeted or given to you to deliver against that project. You also have right below in Excel row 3, you have your resource header, the roles. You also have the type of resource, whether an internal or partner. You have, separate from an internal resource rate, you have a partner rate. And I'll explain to you a bit later why I separate the two out. You have a start date and an end date. You also have an allocation percentage. We will use the start, the end date, and the percentage allocation using a Microsoft Excel function to pre-populate the cells that's highlighted here. Please note that how that works as far as pre-population is that we use a corresponding date to say, does this date fall between the start and end date? If it does, then based on a percentage allocation, it will populate the number of hours for that week. In the case of 50% allocation for this week, you will get 20 hours. In the case of a 75% allocation for this week, for this particular resource, it'll come out to 30. And in the case of a 100% allocation for this resource for the week, you will get 40 hours to correspond to this particular week. I want to share to you how this formula works as far as pre-populating the fields within the corresponding week. I want to make sure that I communicate effectively in layman's term how this is working before I delve into the formula. So when I look at this date, which is 7/6, I say, is 7/6 fall between my start date of 6/30 and 11/30/2015? Yes, it does. Because it falls between these dates, the formula that we use in this cell is set up to say, if it falls between my start and end date, go ahead and populate the value that needs to, that's calculated into this field. And so based on that, let's go ahead and just go into the formula and determine how this works. So what I'm looking at is my start date, end date, my percentage allocation, and if this field, which is called roles, is either null or has a value. If it's null, then a 0 value is returned. So the way this formula works is an if functionality. If BG3, which is my start date, is greater than my start date and less than my end date, then assign a value of 40 times, which is 40 hours per week, times my percentage allocation to give you a value. To recap, please note that we now have a value of 20 hours for this week populated within this cell. And again, it comes from the formula that takes into calculation our date, where does that date fall between our start and end date, and the percentage allocation. Now let's go ahead and start exercising the tool to demonstrate how this tool will help you as a program and project manager. For instance, let's add Jane Jones as one of our resources. She's going to be a senior consultant and she's a partner resource. We're going to go ahead and ensure that her rate is entered. Let's hypothetically say at $150 an hour, and her start date is going to be hypothetically 7/31, 2015, and our end date will be 8/28, 2015. And we're going to go ahead and make sure our allocation is 100%. And as you can see, the fields are pre-populated all the way through 8/28, the week of 8/24, going out through 8/28. If you notice, we have a sum total of 160 hours based on our start and end date for Jane. A couple other things to note is that this value, which is the total hours, is a summation. I did go ahead and make sure that this field is a read-only and cannot be overridden. So if I was to go in there and try to enter something else, it will give me this value entered is not valid. And again, this is a read-only field because it is pre-populated based on the hours allocated from the weekly fields. I'm going to go ahead and add one more resource, and my resource is going to be Bob James, one of my favorite musicians, I might add. And Bob James will be our resident project manager, and he will be an internal resource. And the rate we'll elect is $95 for our project manager, and our start date is going to be 7/1, 2015, and our end date we're going to hypothetically put at 12/2, 2015. And our percentage allocation we're going to use for Bob is going to be 75%. One of the things that you'll note is that right away there is a red formatting condition established that says, what this red conditioning format does is says, if I'm over allocated, I'm going to be flagged. The reason why I know it's over allocated for this resource is simply because what I'm using to determine if we're over allocated or not is our pre-calculated hours that utilizes Excel function of net work days taking into account holidays. So between the period of 7/1 to 12/2, there's a holiday, and I will go ahead and I will unhide the field that I tend to use for doing my holiday calculations. And here I have listed in 2015 as well as 2016 my holidays. If you notice that we have Thanksgiving that falls between the date for the project manager, so we have to take into account those 2 days. That is exactly what this value does, which is the pre-calculated field. It takes into account those 2 holidays as stated here. So what I have to do is, and by the way, when you have this template, you'll be able to look at it and see how this function is built out using our holidays going off the network days worksheet. So what we have here is, this is saying that I'm over allocated by 18 hours. So as a project manager, I think it's very important to you to manage your project effectively and efficiently. Yes, it is important as a project manager, as I was stating, to manage your project effectively and efficiently. The way you do that is, you know that this template is automate a lot of things, but you do have to go back and double check your work to make sure that, number one, you're being thorough. So I know for a fact that my dates that I'm going to, at some point in time during my holidays, I have to reduce my hours to account for those holidays. So what I'm going to do is reduce from 30 hours for that week down to 12 hours for that week. And what that 12 hours is saying is that during the week of the holidays, which is Thanksgiving, I'm going to be working 12 hours for that week, and that's going off my 75% allocation. So that's how we manage to this worksheet. I hope that this information has been of value to you. One of the things I want to do is just go through a couple of other quick things relative to this spreadsheet. One of the things I do want to show is, beyond calculating for the hours, there is a field down here for expenses. There are instances where not only do you have your hours allocated for each resources and their costs associated, but there's also, if you notice, there's also expense. So let's say, for instance, that for each month, or let's say for each week, you are allocated some type of expense, and let's say hypothetically $1,000. So what this does is then another pre-calculated field or populated field where you enter your $1,000 for your resource expense. You also enter $1,000 this week because you know that resource is going to be traveling. So it does what it does, it calculates your total dollar as far as expenses, and then it does a roll up and provide a summation. So for instance, if you know that Bob throughout the duration of the project is going to be traveling on a monthly basis, you could then put $1,000 per week, and it'll just automatically calculate the sum total for you. Going down on a bit further down into this Excel model, you'll notice that I did set up the template that it pulls information from this resource information up top, i.e. if you notice that you have Jane Jones and Bob James, and their information is pre-populated down below. Same thing, there's a concatenation for the name as well as demonstrating the expense right here using this formula, which is A7. A7, if you notice, is for Jane. Then you add the text expense. Now let's go cost area. What this does is it does a calculation based on if it's a partner rate or internal or partner. So in the case of, let's go to Jane, who's a partner resource. If you notice that, and I'll just highlight this column, that her information is calculated at $6,000 starting for the week of 8/3 all the way through her time on the project through 8/28. What this does is take the hours times their rate, hours times rate, to give you a cost. At the very end of this, what's going to happen is you have your expenses and your resource costs, and then it's a summation of your total resource costs for that week. Thanks for taking the time to watch this tutorial on forecasting, building out a forecasting model. Again, my name is Steve Grierson. I will provide my email address as well as location of the template. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or concern about building out this model. Good luck with your forecasting model, and I wish you all the best.